All right, so now we're going to talk about the SAT English strategy. First of all, congratulations, because you've come a long way. We've covered quite a good bit, and I hope that you've grown in leaps and bounds. We talked about punctuation, when we talked about commas, colons, we talked about semicolons, we talked about apostrophes, who versus whom, the dangling and misplaced modifiers, so much stuff. And now we're just going to just add to the knowledge we already have by coming up with a plan that we can execute on exam date. Now, remember, the SAT English section has 4 passages, and you'll have 35 minutes to complete those 4 passages. In total, there will be 44 questions, which means there are 11 questions per passage. In the real world, this is really not a realistic amount of time to give someone to answer 44 questions in 35 minutes. But that's the card we are dealt. We can do nothing to change that, unless of course you have accommodations, which is really great because you get extra time and you're not as stressed or pressed for time as many other people are. If you do have extra time, that's wonderful. This is really for people who don't have extra time, and even if you do, you can apply this knowledge. Just spread out the times that will fit the allotted time that you have. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take those 35 minutes and we're going to split them equally, which means we have about 8.5 minutes per passage. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn each of those 4 passages into its own mini test, each 8.5 minutes long. Ideally, I would very much like to have at least 15 minutes to answer each of these passages. But since we don't, what we have to do is subject ourselves to this time pressure from the beginning. So from day one, as soon as we finish going over these concepts and strategies, you ought to, every time you're completing an SAT English writing paper, which is section 2 of the SAT, you should always have a clock. In fact, I highly recommend getting one of those analog watches that has a minute hand and an hour hand, and practicing to time yourself and count every 8.5 minutes you need to be completing a passage and moving on to the next. Don't get too caught up in one passage. How are we going to do this? We're going to read and answer all the easy questions that we can. Remember, with the English section, you answer as you go. Unlike the reading section, where you read the passage and then go answer the questions, for the English, the writing section, you answer the questions as you go. And of course, there are easier questions and there are, of course, more challenging questions. And the unwritten rule here is, as you progress through each passage, you kind of feel the questions getting a lot more challenging. I'm okay with you guessing the last few questions in the interest of time. Some people will answer the first 9 questions and do quite well, but then on the last 2 or 3 questions, they spend so much time on those that they run out of time and not even have time to finish either the last passage, or in some cases, not have time to finish the last 2. We're leaving too many points on the table if we do that. So I want us from the beginning to start timing ourselves. Get that analog watch and start timing yourself. Each passage should take about 8.5 minutes long. I'm okay with you guessing the last few questions if you have absolutely no clue as to what the correct answer is. That will allow us to take advantage of all the low-hanging fruit, all the questions that we can answer. I would much rather have you guess on the last few than not get to the last 2 passages, or feel really rushed on the last 2 passages and not have enough time to really process your answers. That is our plan for the SAT English section. And I'm going to say this one more time because I cannot overemphasize the importance of starting to time yourself from the get-go. Since we're going to be going over the concepts, there will be plenty of opportunity to try many practice tests. Time yourself on every single one of them. If you have extra time, let's say you have double the time, then you would have 70 minutes, right, to finish this test. Then you would double all these times. If you have time and a half, you multiply each of these by 1.5 to apply that same strategy. The strategy doesn't change, the times may change. So whether you have regular time or time accommodations, you follow this same plan. All right? Awesome.